Say, kids, what time is it?
The future is coming on, it's coming on, it's coming on, it's coming on.
Welcome to the Future Now Show. We are in downtown Santa Cruz today.
Yep.
What a beautiful, cool day here.
Yes,
So
and we are
nice.
learning to fly in the studio here at Santa Cruz Voice at the beautiful downtown offices, the satellite office here on SoCal.
I must say, a beautiful little setup.
Yes,
It mirrors many things we have at home.
yes,
I've even learned a few things.
yes. Well, my compliments to our team here. Bill has set up a wonderful system for all of us, and seems like everybody is getting their needs met.
Dave and Luigi.
Yeah, I love being part of this co-op. We've got so many good people, local Santa Cruzers with hyper-local perspectives and all kinds of brilliant contributions to the zeitgeist of the world we're all living
I
in.
was following my cues here, and Dave said we should meet another local. We
Yeah?
haven't met for a while. Ship's passing the night, if you will.
Oh, you mean our guest today?
Jonathan Trent.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be fun.
Yeah. He's an
Meanwhile,
expert in Extremophiles.
I think we forgot to say hi to Bobby. Let's say hi to Bobby. Hi, Bobby.
Are you there? Hey, there we
Yeah,
are.
I'm here.
All
Yeah.
right.
Good.
What a great looking studio. Wow, it's new, fresh, clean. Wow. Really crisp. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all that equipment. It's great.
Yeah.
You guys sound perfect.
Oh, well, that is thanks to the brilliant engineers who are making Santa Cruz Voice a reality.
And-
We are the lucky beneficiaries. Of course, Al does his part too, and you too, Bobby.
So what I like is the ability to add your own gear to the equipment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 'cause we all have our favorite gear. Be able to hook it in, like my iPad, my laptop.
Great.
All right, so we're going to blame Jonathan Trent, our astrobiologist, extremophile expert, is not only going to be talking about extremophiles, but also about applying the knowledge that he's learned in his life of studying extreme forms of life, how it could benefit our own community. Are we cutting in and out there?
It sort of seems like it, doesn't it? I wonder if that's just the headphones, though, because your
you
levels
sound
look
fine.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
It's fine. Yeah.
It sounds
Yeah,
good.
maybe turn up your headphones a little bit. You look good on the levels here.
Okay, good. Well,
So-
that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Forget what I think about it.
Okay.
So, he's applying some knowledge that he's learned to creating bioreactors that can literally turn our garbage into gold.
Oh,
Garbage
yeah.
into gold.
I love
Yeah,
stuff like this.
Yeah.
I saw his video, and it's very doable. And just south of Santa Cruz there is the perfect spot because of where the internet is, and you're next to the ocean. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And I think this bioreactor and cooling down the data center, it's going to work.
It's not a
all
problem.
makes sense.
It's not a problem. The data centers are making all that heat. It's a feature. Let's use the heat for some bioreactors. Create clean water, electricity. It's amazing. And that's on the second hour. But this first hour, definitely wanted to catch up with future news.
Yeah, let's start with future news. And also, at some point, let's tell people the call-in number because the call-in lines are open.
Very good. Very
Yes.
good.
Okay.
Right after this news segment.
Okay. After some future news, there will be future views from all of you who are listening and interested in being on our show.
Yeah, and the only thing I have to say in the politics department this time is that watch for and keep it entertained. You can keep yourself entertained by what we call not deep fakes, but cheap fakes.
Cheap fakes, huh?
Cheap fakes,
You can tell that they sound a little mechanical.
It'll sound like Kamala. It'll sound like Trump, but it won't be.
Yeah.
Completely words in their mouth.
Didn't we hear somebody reporting today that some speech from Joe Biden was a deep fake? And
Cheap fake, too. Yeah. It's super easy to do. And as such, it's become a new part of our languaging system.
yeah, it's sort of like a big game show out there. Like,
Real
do you
or not real?
believe? Is it the actual or the virtual?
Or is it what I want to believe?
Well, that's always true.
Man, so it's getting fun now.
Yes. Well, doesn't it seem like if you are a media hound, they keep doing this thing on television where it's like top this What tops an assassination attempt? Well, we have the Republican convention where they claim that there's a new spirit of unity and peace, and meanwhile it's the same old of we hate the other guys and the country's going down the tubes unless we win, and everybody feels that way.
Well, I was very heartened by the fact that both sides wanted to fire the head of the Secret Service.
There you go. Something we can come in.
Bipartisan.
We can agree on.
What?
Let's get rid of the deep state.
You missed an obvious sniper position?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
All right. Are you stupid, or are you a loser, or are you part of a bigger conspiracy? How come you can't answer your own questions? How come you're the director of this department and yet you're not accountable?
I can't really tell you anything.
We watched some of those series.
Yeah.
That was textbook evasiveness. Oh my God. I don't know how that woman is going to go through life becoming so famous in that way. She was so sure of herself. Like, hey, I'm protecting my people. I'm not stepping down. I have a 30-year career here. You plebes in the Congress don't know nothing.
That's the
You'll
point,
be out of
isn't
here
it?
before I am.
That's right. That's right.
That's what came across.
Us deep staters are around for the long term.
Yeah.
You guys will be gone before I have breakfast.
Well, there's a lot to be said for having roots. That's true. But her level of confidence was absurd.
Yeah.
You know, like she's untouchable. And I think that she's like the poster child for what is really bugging Americans about our government right now. You've got these fat cats with secret careers who know who the insiders are, and they have more power than you, and they're not talking to you because they don't know you. You didn't grow up. You're not third generation deep state like they are.
Those are all great stories, and they'll probably all be told. And cheap fake versions of those will come out and play with what you're supposed to think about them. So,
well, you hear some of these weird phrases creeping in, like, you know, there's a battle going on between the people who say the Constitution is the law of the land and people who say the federal government is the law of the land. And a lot of, like, even in some of the senators questioning Director Cheadle, they were saying things that sounded like it was right out of, are you following the Constitution or not? And there's a real discrepancy being made between the rules of Washington, D.C., and the rules of the Constitution. And they're not the same. And people are getting smart about drawing that distinction.
yeah, which is a heartening thing.
Yeah.
Oh, and also in terms of politics, so Bobby sent us some pictures showing him hanging out with Kamala.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
When was that, Bobby?
Yeah, Bobby.
Were you hanging out with Kamala?
Yeah.
Well, Jerry Brown was Attorney General first, and then Kamala succeeded Jerry Brown as Attorney General of California.
I see.
So the first time I saw her was at Jerry Brown's wedding in 2005. And then when Jerry took on his third term as governor, and Kamala took on her first term as Attorney General.
So he brought her in.
Yeah, they're very close. I mean, they talk to each other, you know, because they had to share what experiences they had before. Inauguration day on their second term, well, actually, no, Jerry Brown had appointed me as one of his delegates for the Democratic Party for 8 years in a row. And so I'd go to all these Democratic conventions. And so the year after that, I saw Kamala had her first year as Attorney General. I got a picture with her there. Then the inauguration day, which is 2015, on their second term and Jerry's fourth term as governor, Jerry had an after inauguration reception. And so I got a picture with her there. And then she later in the day had her reception and her inauguration speech thing. So again, I saw her again there and got another picture with her there. So I got a bunch of pictures with her.
So how would you characterize your relationship with her?
What's interesting is, if I would have known this, I would have liked to find out. But she actually grew up in Berkeley, in the university housing campus. Her parents were both graduates of UC Berkeley. One was from India. Father was from India, and mother was African American.
Academic background.
Black.
Yeah.
Yes, very high academic background, and so she grew up in Berkeley. So very interesting. I would have.
Yeah, so you enjoyed it? What's your assessment of her?
When I first met her, we didn't talk very much, though. When I was following her on the news, she didn't strike me as being that intelligent. I mean, compared to like Jerry Brown, when I'd have,
Different
I'd have
kind of intelligence.
conversations. She does have a law degree, and she went to Hastings Law, and she went to Howard as a BA. She is intelligent, it's just that. But when she first was like senator and then vice president, she didn't really respond the way I thought she would have. But now she's very sharp. They've trained her somehow.
Do you think she's an upgrade from Biden?
Oh, for sure. Because I met Biden back in 85, but there's something missing there upstairs for sure.
Yeah. So.
I mean, it's very clear to me.
You mean brain fog kind of stuff missing?
Yeah.
Dementia?
It's beyond that. I think there's some dementia there. For sure.
Memory access.
Yeah, well, I think there hasn't been any doubt about it. But the conversation we've been having is that in our democracy, even though the poster child is the man or the woman who is running for office, the actual work is done by the team. And I think that the last few elections have been very much vitriolic team smear campaigns. And this is what's really destroying our country. And RFK is doing some very good talks about how the vitriol is the real problem. We Americans haven't really changed that much who we are. We've always been very outspoken, very opinionated. But what has changed is our contentment with our lives and our disrespect for people who are not on our team. And that is what is ruining our public discourse, is the vitriol and the lack of respect.
So bipartisan is good. So everyone getting behind firing Chortle brought everyone together.
Sure. Hey, you know how it's always so much easier to take power away from a woman than a man, right?
But there is something about blame, right? It seems like we really need to blame somebody. But as Kamala said, we need to think Venn diagram.
I love Venn diagrams. I love Venn diagrams. And whenever I am presented with kind of like, this is complicated, I always wonder, is there a Venn diagram to figure this stuff out?
Venn diagram.
What does that say to you? What do you mean?
Blame is the name of the no-win game. But the real game, if you really want to play, it's a combination of forces that created whatever outcome it is. It's very seldom as straightforward as, like, Cheadle didn't even know. She didn't even see the security diagram of the place in Pennsylvania, the Bethel, Pennsylvania location. She didn't.
It was such a classic bureaucratic nut.
Yeah,
that she's too high up in the pyramid to pay attention to the details or to even be prepared to tell the Congress, who are supposed to be her bosses, but she obviously thinks she's more important than they are. She doesn't need to answer their questions.
Well, I think she got pretty high because from what I could see, one of her big assignments was personal Secret Service agent to Jill Biden.
Jill Biden, that's how she got appointed to be the director of the Secret Service, right?
During Biden's campaign, actually in 22, I think, after well in power.
I wonder if you're not close enough to the mic. It sounds like it's going in and out.
Maybe we should try the other headset.
I wouldn't mind. Sure. Why don't you try the other headset?
Testes, 1, 2. 1, 2.
I heard that.
Good.
I don't hear anything.
I hear.
You sound better. I think you should use that mic.
Okay.
I think it's way better.
Thank you.
What a relief. Hey, it looks like there's already a regular caller here on our phone lines. So anytime you want to check in, he just called a minute ago.
This hour is for our callers, especially.
All right.
Yeah.
Are you ready to say hi?
Let's say hi.
All right. Let's say hi to Aaron. You're the first caller that I have welcomed to our show in the Santa Cruz Voice Studio here in the Satellite Center. So welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Wow, I can dig it. Very novel in the age of novelty.
Yeah.
Oh, so many things to touch on, as always. I mean, it's just, there's more and more stuff coming at us, right? And
Isn't it crazy?
Time is speeding up, for sure.
Thanks, computers.
And it's interesting because normally we don't focus on political things, but what's happening definitely involves political levels of discussion. In our case, it really might bring us to some new information on whether or not this is a universe or a multiverse.
Or what?
Hyperverse? You're right. Or what?
And that could mean, two different ways, like, or what, like I'm agreeing with you. Or something else.
That and.
But,
you were saying?
and, Anyway, I just wanted to say, there was one thing, I forget who you were quoting or something, the vitriol or whatever.
Yeah,
I've been meditating on this thing. It's often more kind of the hype that's what's really happening, you know what I mean? It's very strange, hard to explain, but it's like, it's all the excitement over the president and how drastic it is and which one. It's all, it's the kind of hype, but down low, some of us aren't even sure how much the president affects things, you know what I mean? We don't really...
Yeah, I agree.
It's
That's the whole point.
Is what I'm saying,
Well,
you know what
yeah.
I mean?
But keep in mind, there's an old saying about how a butterfly's wings in the other side of the world can affect us here. So things are connected.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that.
I'm looking,
trying to remain calm and put good vibes out into our local universe is really the main power that we have. And it's the reason why America works so well, is because even though these headline showboaters that are filling our mainstream media screens that aren't even getting as much of the ratings as, say, the X audience, people who are on social media, but still it's the old, if it leads, it bleeds, and what the loudest voices are talking about are the meanest things that happen. But what the local, invisible people are talking about is a whole different flavor. The local issues are so divorced from the far-off national issues. But the national issues get the lion's share of the time.
Yeah. Though having bioreactors and data centers in our neighborhood might be good for us.
Yeah, there you go. Well, they say that the local programming is really where it's going through a huge renaissance, where people are paying much more attention locally than for the last few years because it's just more real.
Yeah, it directly affects us. Yeah.
I have a little future vision, too, I've been thinking about. I want to run by the futurists.
Oh, cool.
It's a little inspired by, I hate to bring up the noise book I was talking about, not about noise, as Sonny, you might understand, but a different definition. It's a distortion of the truth. It's like bias anyway. But it's a very vital, again, I have to, if there's anything I could ever tell anybody, I think this is some vital stuff. And one of the things that comes from it is that there's a distortion when people deliberate. And right now, that's a new thing to us, relatively, the internet, where everybody's got to have an opinion and deliberate. Mm-hmm. It causes a lot of distortion. They even show that in the future, we might not have juries deliberate because it gets them, the research is showing it throws them off. Whereas the individual, when they look at everything and think about it and they don't talk to each other, and then they just put out. So I thought, some people are switching to no comments on their social media with certain posts and stuff for this reason. It just gets too chaotic. Whereas if you just say your thing, everybody thinks about it and everybody just says their thing. I thought in the 12 steps use this, the no crosstalk. It's a real, I think it's our future, hopefully.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I'm sure you're right. There's a place for it, but I don't think it's either or. I think people have different media personalities, and I've noticed this since the very early days of social media. There's some people that are very oriented towards quick, first, and fast. I guess quick and fast are the same thing, but they want the first news, they want the fastest news, and they want to get it ahead of everybody else. So that kind of person is a social media addict. But then there are other people that are far more aware of history and are far more interested in the bigger picture and are far more interested in whether things are actually factual or not. And they're not so involved in the conversation about trying to get the headline and get the influencer vibe and get the rush. They're actually interested in having a measured conversation that gives us a deeper understanding. And it's a very different kind of person. And people like that are more interested in, say, the long format podcast or live talk radio or a Substack, where the conversation is slower paced and more expansive. And so what you're talking about is closing off the comments for the blog post so that just the original thought becomes part of the conversation. Well, of course, publishers love that perspective. Like, I like to have my thoughts out there published, and I feel a little bit irresponsible if I get a bunch of comments and I don't read them all or participate with them. And I know when I'm in a crowd of people online and I'm putting comments out there and I feel like nobody's listening or getting it, I find that very unsatisfactory. So I understand what you're saying about how that format of turning off the comments can do something to amplify the important message you're trying to share.
Yeah, actually, I probably shouldn't have, or wasn't meaning to put emphasis on that so much. I was just kind of saying that's a version of what I was more talking about is just kind of the evolution that we're, probably headed that way, I think. And I say hopefully, from my perspective, that people, it's the same old story, I would estimate, where the wise are the small number amongst us. It's a subculture. So, what I mean? I was like, when are the better ideas going to catch on? Because many of them have been around for thousands of years. You know what I mean? You see people like Alan Watts and stuff that decades ago, or Jesus or Buddha, or you know what I mean? Who knows?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like that kind of my perception of like what is the wise, the humane person, all that, like, and how are we going to get there quicker? Where are we?
Yeah. Yes, and you find your group, your karass, as Kurt Vonnegut used to say, those that you have this strange journey you are on now.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Listen, Aaron, thanks so much. We're going to go to our little break, and it's always good to hear from you. And thanks for launching us to live calls in the studio. Cool.
All right.
Bye for now.
Okay, yeah, bye for now. And like I say, it's time to listen to some folks who bring you Santa Cruz voice.
You need a clean, pleasant space to conduct business, but you don't want the burden of a long, expensive lease. Your solution is Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Satellite offers private offices, meeting and conference rooms, even co-working by the day, hour, week, or month. Schedule a tour at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
When you need help escaping from an abusive relationship, call on the Angel.
Hello, I am Attorney Angel Hess, and I am ready to help you. Whether you or a loved one needs legal protection from an abusive spouse, cohabitant, or neighbor, I will help you. I have over 7 years' experience working as a lawyer protecting others from abusive relationships.
Stop the abuse now. Call on the Angel, Attorney Angel L. Hess at santacruzlegal.net.
Do never get a second chance to make a good first impression. When you want to make a good first impression, start with Dynamic Press Angelo.
Dynamic Press can take care of every printing need, from business cards to stationery, apparel, mailings, brochures, everything but money.
When you want to make a good first impression, start with Dynamic Press in Santa Cruz.
479-7920. DynamicPress.com.
The Hook is California's first ever cannabis outlet. 100% locally owned and operated, we're here to be your friendly neighborhood hookup. We believe that everyone should have access to fairly priced cannabis, so we work hard to get it to you for 30 to 50% less than the other guys. If you're 21 or older with a valid ID, visit us in Capitola or in Watsonville today. We're here to be your friendly neighborhood hookup. Check out our website, hookoutlet.com, for deals and stay groovy.
Hey, we're back. I think that might have been somebody visiting Bobby. Wasn't here.
I'm back. Yeah.
It's another crazy idea. We're going to see a lot of people are really worried about the cheap fakes, where we're really being able to fake out anyone's voice. I think 7 seconds of recording of anyone's voice, and we have a replicant voice of that person.
And you've been experimenting a lot with that, right? Have you found that to be true?
I'm just getting into cloning.
Yes.
Myself.
Right.
I've had other interests.
Cloning yourself in 7 seconds of voice sounding
no, I haven't done
familiar to you?
No, I'm just starting the cloning process. But what I just need to sign on for one new account. Mm-hmm. A mere $11 a month extra
to
and
I'll
be able
yourself.
to clone voices. Yes, Yes, and that's my next commitment in the tech arena. For those of you who really want to know, check out 11 Labs. 11 Labs. The best places on the net for really cool new voice apps, like cloning.
Right.
And other stuff.
Yeah. I do think that you can tell that most of those voices are fake.
I think you can. So I'm thinking that one good thing to study in terms of AI languaging would be to really look at what makes a mimic funny. What makes a comic, when they're imitating someone, what makes them funny.
So the comedic uncanny valley?
No, I think it's a caricature. Of trying to make fun of them in a way that kind of sounds like them but isn't quite them.
That was your Terrence McKenna impression.
Well, it's some in between with Margaret Mead, maybe a little.
Right.
But yeah. Basically, we have those channels available.
Sure. Well, Scarlett Johansson was actually suing OpenAI because
they copied her voice.
Voice sounded so much like her that her family thought it was her, and they denied it.
Well, here's the thing: if you can make it fun, then you're ahead of the game. You're surfing that wave. So to be able to have an ability to know when a mimic is having fun, even though it's not perfect, it's still funny.
Right.
And that's the key. So it's all about how much fun it is. And if the AIs can learn that, that would be good.
Okay, so you're putting out this prompt to the AIs.
To make them better is to, if you're going to mimic us, to at least make fun of us as you're mimicking, in a way that makes me laugh. Ideally.
Is it because humor is legally allowed as commentary as opposed to fact, or, when you're trying to... So maybe when you're trying to imitate someone, their voice, if you make it a character, like you say, then it can be considered humor rather than trying to copy them directly. And
it gives it another context for play.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a matter of time until it's the Terminator dialing all the Sarah Connors in the phone book. And
I know, right? Well, let's have some fun with this before it all turns to chaos. That's all I'm asking.
I'm just saying, I think that the resolution of our computer intelligence is going to make so many of the things that we do right now obsolete. We're just going to hand over so much of the fact-checking and so much of the discerning of what's true and what's not to the actual programs that can digest huge amounts of data that are far beyond our individual capacities.
Yeah, don't even compete. It's a different game.
Well, it's not about competing. I mean, accountants...
No!
There are still accountants, even though we've computerized accounting. There are people who understand the principles and who are looking for the results of the accelerated systems management.
I'd say they have a higher level job at this point. Human intelligence goes into another level.
Yeah, human intelligence is the leader, and the efficiencies of large data sets and algorithms that mine the data are for our benefit. We just have to ask the right questions so that what comes out of it gives us a better world. It gives us the better world that we want. We have to stand up as humans, just like we have to stand up as Americans. We have to take pride and joy in the lives that we are living so that we can have that example stand on its own and we don't have to shove it down anybody's throat with a gun, right?
Yeah, have a good life.
Yeah, have a good life and really broadcast the highest human emotions.
Okay, well, that brings into mind this story. This is a topic that has caused a lot of pain in the past.
Okay.
It has to do with the opioids, right?
Yeah.
The opioid crisis.
Yeah,
well,
didn't we lose
the breakthrough
25 million people to ODs in the last year?
I don't even want to think about the statistics. I know it's horrible. It's horrible that so many people have lost people they've loved, including us.
Yeah. More people to ODs than in the last wars, in World War II,
Yeah.
And it's not even being spoken about.
So I ask you, okay, that being the case, how can this get better?
Yes, the opioid crisis.
The addiction,
why does it exist?
Okay, the addiction seems to be the issue. Right?
Well, the pain is the issue.
Well, the idea that you need it to stay pain-free, otherwise you start experiencing extreme pain. And so the addiction keeps you from doing that, right? Because no one wants to go into extreme pain. And of any kind. So what would happen if you could quit the opioids and not have that withdrawal?
That's the gold standard.
Right? Okay, so
pain-free existence.
In that arena, and that level of thinking, there are researchers working on that. Apparently, there's a natural compound that promises pain relief without addiction.
Wow. Where are they developing this?
Mainz University in Germany, M-A-I-N-Z. Mm-hmm. They discovered a natural compound that could serve as a long-term alternative to opioids.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Now, how this particular chemical can be manufactured or distributed still needs to be determined. There's a huge opioid crisis in Germany as well, as there is here, so they have a lot of interest in it. And there's a lot of pain there. So a natural product is called quinolazolin.
Say that 3 times fast.
Quinolazolin B. Mm-hmm. And it's isolated from the marine fungus, Aspergillus nidulans.
I think you better work on your Latin.
Nidulans. Nidulans. No, Nidulans. Nidulans. Aspergillus nidulans. So this natural product stimulates the opioid receptors and, as such, might substitute for them. And there doesn't seem to be any side effects, like pain.
Well, I would say that pain is not a side effect. Pain is the reason why people are taking these things, right? So can they be prescribed for pain relief?
Well, that's the hope. I hope right now the team had started with a chemical database of about 40,000 natural substances, and they were trying to determine how effectively these substances would bind to different receptors. They were literally, it's like brute force, for thousands of combinations being tried, and this is one that stuck. Mm. Anyway, they're going to further evaluation, of course. They want to see what kind of long-term effects there are in particular. And one of the 2 compounds so far, the anaquinazolin B and the marine fungus, Aspergillus nidulans, the results indicate that it has a similar effect to opioids, at the same time far fewer undesirable reactions. Not no, but far fewer undesirable reactions.
Well, this could be great.
Yeah.
Hey, I just need to update my statistics because I was kind of remembering some campaign speech, and I think they probably said 250,000, which would be 250,000, not 25 million. And it looks like ODs in 2019 were about 50,000, and then by 2022 they're about 81,000 per year. So
well, that's like getting bigger than traffic accidents.
Yeah. So big numbers, and definitely something that if we could find a way to help these poor suffering people without creating this massive addiction and OD problem.
Well, it would eliminate that as a problem. And if the species has learned its lessons, it won't happen again. Well, we'll see.
Spoken like a true cyborg.
Well, I say. It could be that addiction exists for a higher purpose that has not yet been discovered.
Uh-huh.
It's possible, probably not, but it's have to have an open mind.
Yeah, well, it's all about can't have too much of a good thing, right? If it's a good thing, you have just the right amount. It's when you do it excessively, it becomes a bad thing.
Yeah. What do you think, Bobby? You think it would be a good idea to have a substitute for opioids?
Oh, absolutely. I've known friends that, they start off, they go to the hospital and they get operated for back pain or something, and then they end up on prescription meds for their type of opiates. And eventually, they have to go off market. They have to get prescriptions because they're addicted to these opioids. And then some of them end up getting street drugs like fentanyl, and they OD.
Yeah.
That's the...
Well, I'll tell you, I have to think about people who are trying to do pain management without opioids, and that is a whole different class of hero. Trying to heal yourself by actually feeling all your pain and using your conscious awareness to work with your pain to help your body to get beyond it, that is a kind of a superhuman attainment.
Definitely.
And that's a whole nother conversation that you'll never have. But in a crisis, you definitely want people to be able to have alternatives to pain, because pain is one of those big corners in life that you just cannot achieve your goals when you're struggling with acute pain.
I'm sure a lot of...
It's so debilitating. I remember I had a neck injury, and gosh, I couldn't drive a car. I had to spend half my time in bed. It was crazy. And I decided, my mother said, don't take any kind of painkillers. She didn't even prescribe aspirin to me, as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
so, Bobby, what did you think of the Gom Jabir then?
The Gom Jabir in Dune.
Yes. Do you remember that?
Oh, no. Tell me.
Oh, well, that is the test that the Bene Gesserit used to discover if Paul Atreides was in fact the Quetzat Haderach or not. Right?
Oh, how much
Gom
pain he
Jabir.
could take?
Yeah, it was like this little jab that they gave him that induced intense pain, and he had to withstand his desire to remove his hand from the box because he was experiencing the perception of his hand being burnt to a crisp down to the bone, and
Even though
he had to power through it.
Yeah, it was an illusion, but it was a real illusion.
Yeah,
the Bene Gesserit somehow could stimulate his brain.
They knew how to do pain. They knew how to stimulate the pain. They didn't give him any opioids.
Forget the nervous system.
He had to do it with his mind, the little mind killer.
But they did use obviously an element of the nervous system, or otherwise there wouldn't be no need for the box.
I hold at your neck the Gom Jabbar. Poison needle, instant death. The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain.
It kind of reminds me of in the Iraq War, the first one, they were using these sound waves and also their microwaves that caused the skin to feel like it caught on fire. And the Iraqi army was on the other end of this pain ray, and they just dropped their guns and ran. It was just pretty incredible. So,
amazing stuff. It really is. But equally exciting is the other side. And I'm not talking, we're talking about pain here, but there's also, well, of course, there's pleasure. But then there was this scientist that took some psychedelic mushrooms, I believe, and went into an MRI, have his brain scanned as he was coming on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, and it got published as a scientific article.
And so I could see how interesting that is.
Name of science. He scanned his own brain. And he had done his brain many times before this. Not 9
so he did boring brain. He did steady state, and then he did
psychedelics and jumped
psychedelic brain. Okay, so what did you find out?
Well, the only problem, with this is that, from my understanding, MRIs are really noisy and they make this terrible rattling sound. So they could trigger off some negative thought formation.
Like the MRI itself might create
hallucinations.
But at least it would be even between the steady state brain and the hallucinating brain, right? I mean, you'd have the same MRI noise.
Yeah, that's true. But in normal state, you can filter out disturbing sounds better.
Yeah, sure. All right, but we're just interested in the comparison here.
Anyway, he tried it. He went in and he said it was the first time he had ever done this, taking a mind-bending substance and going into an MRI machine. Right? And he said, quote, "I was like drifting deeper into weirdness," he recalls. "I didn't know where I was at all. Time stopped, and I was everyone." Well, okay, so it sounds like he was in a
sounds like any normal trip that any tripper describing. Right? In fact, there's a lot of TikToks right now with Kamala Harris saying very similar things,
Well, there you go. I mean, this was the result of a high dose of psilocybin in an MRI machine.
Right.
That's the active ingredients in magic mushrooms. It's all part of a study of a grand total of 7 people researching this.
Oh, boy.
Wow. And it was published in Nature. And so they're looking at the brain networks that psychedelic drugs seem to affect by looking at the way the brain activity changes while all these people are on. And they're beginning to see that there are certain areas of the brain that help create our sense of space, our perception of time.
Oh, so they're mapping the
where
thought
these
fields of the brain.
Where these things are. Where identity, the identities of self are located.
Wow, you think it's the same for everybody? Not just unique to this person?
Well, the scientists say that the first time they really detail where they can see it's not so much a location, but certain networks that are active.
Oh.
Networks are connectedness between different parts of the brain. They create different patterns, network patterns.
Sure. It's the old Aunt Hillary concept. Remember I told you about that book by Doug Hofstadter, The Mind's Eye?
Yeah.
And he's got a story in there called Aunt Hillary. It's a sci-fi story about having a conversation with his friend, Aunt Hillary, who is actually an ant hill, who writes messages in the sand on the beach as Aunt Hillary, but none of the individual ants are aware of the fact that they're part of this larger super being who the author is having a conversation with. Right? So
yeah.
So that's kind of how these neural networks is storing data, right? There are all these electromagnetic fibers of neurons that are sending messages and patterns and recording them somehow in our brain's tissue. And then we're using our electrical probes to see how those patterns have been stored when we are looking for them, when we're recalling them. And it's a whole different layer.
What level of storage are we looking at here?
Yeah, that's the question. We call it language or thoughts or familiar memories, but the brain calls it something else.
It's very psychedelic to look at their description in this article. And there's different parts of the brain and they're lighting up, and you can see that they're like in groups, and these groups have certain kinds of, well, they're depicted as colors, but they're exciting. And each group has a certain type of idea or image or something, but they're simultaneously happening. So that's where you get these hallucinations where different ideas compete with other ideas and they just come out of nowhere and appear. This doctor, I got a brain MRI, and I think it costs between $3,000 to $5,000 per brain scan, right?
Yeah, you can't exactly just play around with it.
And he has the luxury of having 11 of these while he's doing his trips, right? So,
it's almost as fun as the X-ray machine out on the playa.
Yeah, we're going to have to invest in our own community of MRI so that we can really mess around with this stuff. Right.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think they're going to discover different parts of the brain when it's activated, what it causes, and resolve a lot of depression and problems with people. I think if you can just somehow find ways to activate different pleasure centers and discourage the ones that are discouraging thoughts and biofeedback. I think
it says participant.
It's great research.
It is. It's fascinating, and apparently they're really into it. It says that participants' brains were scanned at an average of 18 times over a 3-week period.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of trips to an electromagnetic device, man.
Well, our subjects only tripped 18 times over the last 3 weeks.
I wonder, how does that compare to, say, taking lithium for your depression?
Well, you want to be in the lithium group, or do you want to be in the mushroom group?
Oh, did they do mushrooms every time too?
So psilocybin.
They did psilocybin and MRI.
MRI, yeah.
Like, that's the gateway.
All right, coming on. Okay, quick. Are you one? Get in. They said that the psilocybin caused swift and dramatic changes in certain brain networks. They said usually the neurons in a given network become active at the same time, in tandem with other networks. Like, things come on, just like turning on the light switch, literally.
And
the brain, the brain
this is
lights
with
up.
the psilocybin?
Yeah, when the psilocybin kicks in, it kicks in an obvious way.
Like there's a recognizable signature.
Said, I'm tripping now.
Oh, okay.
Boom, and you.
So in the future, they're not going to give you like breath tests anymore. They're going to give you little MRIs to measure your state of awareness.
It could be an option, and maybe it'll help us improve our state of awareness.
Definitely.
They call them synchronization patterns. And then they're also equally interested in the desynchronization patterns, where suddenly all the different patterns change very quickly, desynchronize and then resynchronize, and new patterns across the brain.
So what does that make you think about in terms of your own awareness?
That it's a holistic process, that consciousness doesn't come from any one part of the brain or the other. That's a kind of a collaborative emergence from all the layers of what creates us. Spontaneous emergence.
So it's beyond chemistry, it's beyond electromagnetism.
They all contribute to
There's
the
some
moments.
kind of invisible zone of thought fields that are activating and deactivating parts of our circuitry.
Yeah, that's it, Mrs. Future.
It's trying to decode you here.
Yeah. Making sense yet?
Well, I sure like what it's making me think about. I don't know how much sense it's making, but it's kind of
didn't understand
expansive.
A single word he said. Just helped him drink his wine. Yeah. I appreciate that. These scientists have been studying the synchronization-desynchronization process. They're also been interested in other states of consciousness, too, besides tripping, like daydreaming. Mm-hmm. Daydreaming is a fascinating state of awareness.
I take it they're not too worried about memorization or rote or math.
That's a different bunch of scientists.
That's what I thought.
I want to see how well you memorize.
No,
I don't think so.
It was always the big joke in school how the pharmacists were all the ones who wanted to manufacture their own drugs.
Yeah, everyone goes to their own affinities. What can you say? It seems to work that way.
When I was at Berkeley, I picked up that book, Vicol, by Alexander Shuglin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, classic.
And he was looking at this benzene ring, which is part of mescaline, you know? And he was finding all these analogs, and he stumbles across MDMA, and then he realizes one trip on MDMA was equal to 10 therapeutic sessions with your psychiatrist.
Wow.
You know, at least. Just one 3-hour trip was equal to many, many months of therapy.
And
That's amazing.
And then there was the amazing idea of one trip with your therapist.
Yes, that's the best, yes. or with a shaman. That's even better.
Yeah, your therapist shaman, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're heading into the mid-show break, and then we'll be back with our guest, Jonathan Trent. So enjoy these next few minutes of news and views, and see you after that. Future Now.
All right, see you then.
Hey.
Hey, well, there you go. Okay.
It's Dr. Jonathan Trent in the studio with us, a local scientist who's, interestingly, you started here in Santa Cruz, way back at UC Santa Cruz, one of the first students in the early 70s, and studying the ocean and microorganisms back in those days.
Yeah, I was the first wave.
That was the first
wave of Santa Cruz UCSC grads, huh?
Yeah,
wow.
Just after they got them out of their trailers, I was in that early group. It was quite fun.
Wow.
I probably would never have finished my academic career if it hadn't been for UCSC and its free-wheeling
They didn't do grades back then,
no
right?
grades, not even a pass-fail. You just took a class, and if you did well, you got credited, and if you didn't do well, you didn't get credit. And and then they threw you out if you didn't pass a bunch of classes in a certain time. So it wasn't totally without consequence.
Yeah. How did you decide on UC Santa Cruz?
Well, to be honest, when I finished high school, I decided I didn't want to go to the university. I wanted to just teach myself. I'm an autodactyl kind of person, and I went and started studying in the library. But my high school girlfriend got accepted at UCSC, and she compelled me to apply.
Girls, huh?
And I wrote it totally
I'm
off
glad
the
you're one of those people who has been well influenced by the women you love.
Yeah.
So you went from there, and once you were in, how did you discover your passion?
Oh, my. Well, I shopped around a lot. And that was the good thing about UCSC. I came in and studied literature for a while and then switched to linguistics and mathematics and got involved with John Grinder and Richard Bandler.
Oh, NLP.
No kidding.
NLP.
Wow.
That was before there was NLP. They were working on their first books called The Structure of Magic. And they were looking for linguistic cues for behavioral patterns. And I was one of the guinea pigs that they were using in the classes that we were in. It was fun. It was interesting. But I mean, I had studied transformational grammar with John Grinder. And then I was taking biology to be a well-rounded person. And so I met John Pierce, who was a professor of invertebrate zoology and subtidal ecology. And I'd been a diver my whole life, and so it was really a great connection to start realizing there were names for all those
creatures in
things
the
in the water.
Oh, boy.
Wow. You were a scuba diver?
I'm a scuba diver, yeah. And so the actual progression was that I was studying subtidal ecology in the kelp beds with John Pierce at Hopkins, and I had this idea. Mary Silver was my professor for pelagic ecology, studying the open ocean. And I naively said, why not use scuba to study the open ocean?
Yeah, you're out there, I guess.
Mary gave us the keys to the Boston Whaler, and we went out in the middle of Monterey Bay and went diving. And it was quite an eye-opener. We ended up writing a paper about our observations because we were able to see things that most marine scientists couldn't sample. Our first paper was published in Science.
Is that regarding what they called snow?
Yes, marine snow is what it's called.
Detritus of some sort in the water?
Yeah, it's detritus. It's all kinds of remains that stay floating, a lot of mucus, slimy stuff that's in the ocean. And it's really impossible to study unless you get in the water or you have some robotic system.
Yeah.
I mean, this was back in the days when we did Apollo. We sent people to the moon. And we sent people into the deep ocean. And that was a bit nutty, really. I mean, now we do everything with robots. Way better than what we could do and not depth restricted.
Yeah, well,
shark
nobody dies, right?
Would you like to switch to virtual, or were you one of the guys that really liked being out there in the field?
Oh, I was really enamored of diving in the open ocean, and I did a lot of it. I went from San Francisco to Hawaii and dove along that whole cruise track, and then Hawaii to Tahiti, and dove along that whole cruise track, and from Woods Hole to the Azores and Azores to Scotland, and dove almost every day along that cruise track. The only days we didn't dive was when the weather was really horrible and we couldn't get in the water. It was too dangerous.
Well, so you saw the world, really?
Yeah, I did, from underwater.
Underwater world, wow.
I actually dove through most of the main currents in the ocean, not in the Arctic or in the Antarctic. Most
in the currents themselves.
It's really quite amazing because as you cross the equator, you go through a really high productivity zone. Like, I saw the deserts and the forests and the real jungles of the ocean.
Wow.
And I took pictures.
Wow.
I took pictures along the way. I had a girlfriend when I was at Scripps doing my PhD who saw some of my photographs, and she was an artist. And she said, well, you have to do an exhibit because that's how artists think. And I said, well, no, they're just an archive of things I've observed. No, you need to. So I gathered together all my savings as a graduate student, and I spent, $4,000 framing all these beautiful photographs. Wow. And I put them up in an exhibit at Scripps and then at the museum in L.A. And then it was over, and I thought, wow. That was a lot of work, and I know it's just going to sit in a closet somewhere or a garage. And so I submitted it to the Smithsonian, and I traveled with the Smithsonian's Traveling Exhibition Series for 5 years and went all over the country, in fact, all over Canada.
Wow. What was the name of the exhibit? Do you
remember? It was called UFOs, the unfamiliar fauna of the open sea.
Unfamiliar fauna.
I guess MUFON wasn't a thing yet.
No, it was before that. And they were all slides that I carefully had enlarged into pictures. And they're actually now hanging at Moss Landing Marine Lab.
Oh, beautiful.
Wow.
So they were all framed photographs.
The Mbari? Or
no,
not there? Moss
Landing, the San Jose State University Marine Lab in Moss Landing.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I've been there for like 20 years. So.
Sure. So from the ocean to other kinds of inner spaces and outer spaces, that was just your training ground.
Was that still when you were at UC? Where did you go from UC?
I left UC Santa Cruz and moved to Hopkins and worked at Hopkins Marine Station doing research for a while. And then that's in Monterey and Pacific Grove. And then I went to Scripps Institution of Oceanography.
Oh, down south, huh?
Down in La Jolla, yeah.
Oh, that's
and I did my PhD there. I actually got involved in a really interesting project. The hydrothermal vents have been discovered back then.
A lot of people thought that's where life itself emerged.
Yes, it's true. Probably not, but the temperatures are just excruciatingly
Well, what
high.
was it about the event? Is that where you first saw extremophiles?
Yeah, so what happened was the hydrothermal vents were a real mystery because they're surrounded by life in the deep ocean. And it's partly because it's like an oasis in a dark, cold environment.
Like a campfire on a cold night.
A hearth in the middle of the dark ocean.
Yes, that's a metaphor I really like to use. Yeah. And I was studying bacteria that lived in the deep ocean that are called piezophiles or barophiles. These organisms were isolated from the Marianas Trench. So, that's...
I remember these articles. Weren't they found on old whale bone fossils or something like that?
They were actually found just in the water and in the sediments. Oh. And they were brought up under pressure and kept cold. And we kept them alive in the lab at 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, 1,000 bars.
Wow.
Of pressure.
So they might survive on a Jupiterian satellite or something, huh? That can handle the heavy pressure.
Temperature's pretty cold, but they can handle amazing pressure. So not only do they handle the pressure, but they require the pressure to
Did you have to build a special chamber that could withstand those pressures?
Absolutely. We had titanium cylinders, and we put the microbes inside basically syringes, plastic syringes, and we threw them in with the media inside the syringe and then capped off, and then we threw them into these titanium vessels, filled it with silicon oil, and then pressurized them. And And we could decompress them once a week or every other week, and we would change their media so they could grow. And they would survive just a short period of time decompressed. Oh, wow. So they had to get recompressed right away or they would die.
Yeah, because we couldn't survive where they lived.
No.
Yeah, it really sounds like you're, to them, the equivalent of a gray alien who's like putting them in a little experimental spaceship and then giving them new life experiences.
There are a lot of environments that we can't.
So how would you describe their natural habitat?
Oh, my God. Dark, cold. I mean, their only light is biologically generated.
Really? They generate their own light?
Piezo.
Yeah, the ones we were studying didn't produce light bioluminescence, but all around there are organisms that do.
So they had other creatures in their ecosystem.
Oh, yeah. The deep ocean is a desert, but it's not a dead desert. It's a live desert.
At least on the microbial level, especially. Right?
Oh, especially on the microbial level, right. And we were talking about harvesting magnesium nodules from the deep ocean now, and those are microbially generated over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and very slow, cold, dark environment. It's a pretty amazing place to think when you consider that it's covering 71% of the Earth's surface. Yeah. It's dark and cold. And never changing. Really, the only influx is coming from stuff sinking from the surface water into this dark environment. And many of the larger organisms vertically migrate up into the surface waters and then back down.
Well, is it more stable than the land in terms of climate change?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's a very good question as to whether the oceans have always been cold, but they've certainly been cold for a very long time.
So they'd have more of an uninterrupted chain of evolution than land?
Yeah, it used to be thought in 19th century biology, evolutionary biology, people like Huxley suggested that the deep ocean was inhabited by the primordial ooze.
Because it'd be a long term, they have more years in evolving than we would.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. And there was actually, when they went on those voyages of discovery in the early 20th century and late 19th century, they would bring samples back to the laboratory, and they found this material in the samples that they brought back that was ubiquitous. And it was somewhat organized and it wasn't really biological, but it wasn't abiological. And it became known as bathybius. And it was ubiquitous. And many of the scientists like Huxley and Haeckel, they were speculating about this stuff. They called it the Urschleim, the ancient slime that was left over from the origins of life. And, the amazing thing about this is there was a chemist that went to sea, and he collected this material to look at fresh samples, because all of the scientists at that point had looked at preserved samples that were preserved with alcohol. And what this guy discovered was that this was an artifact, that this Urschleim, which they called Bathybius haeckeli, was only formed when they added alcohol to seawater.
Couldn't
was
find it.
Complete nonsense. There was nothing like that. And this guy discovered it. And not people who make these types of discoveries don't get very famous, because the scientific community were their most famous people being embarrassed immediately to retract. So whoops. Anyway, it's funny that you mentioned that about the Urschleim and the primitive ooze in the deep ocean.
Yes, and it had us all this time to evolve for how many years? For a billion years?
Yeah. Well, it's not clear how long the oceans have been cold. There's some evidence that the oceans during the history of the Earth have been actually quite warm. And they've gone through excursions of cooling and warmth.
And your understanding of life is that where it's warmer, there's more life, typically, right?
Depends. The temperature range, the Goldilocks range, where the temperature has to be quite right.
Biology loves it.
Yes.
And it's a relation of temperature and pressure, probably, right?
Well, in the ocean, pressure is important. On land, it's not as important, although there are organisms living in the deep earth. But the temperature limit has been something that we've been wondering about for a long time, and something that I've spent quite a lot of time studying.
Do you study organisms in the atmosphere as well?
I didn't, but there were people at NASA, when I was at NASA, that studied atmospheric organisms in higher altitudes.
The other extreme.
Yeah, it's not clear that they're actually metabolically active, but they're certainly sampleable. They're up in the air. But whether they are living up there or just surviving up there is a different story. You have to understand the requirements for metabolism, water, and an energy source.
Yeah, well, they'd have a lot of sun up there. I would say.
Well, and UV, and they would have to protect themselves from the ultraviolet.
Yeah.
Because that damages their biomolecules.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, I spent a lot of time studying all this stuff.
Yeah,
I ended up studying
fascinating.
extremophiles from hydrothermal vents.
Do they have a genetic manipulation that succeeded in them being able to survive at such high temperatures underwater?
You mean the organisms living in the highest
Extremophiles in the high temperatures. Yeah, I heard some of them had flagellae that would cool the water around them by flipping really fast. That would cause the water to be cooler in their immediate membrane vicinity. I don't know. How did they survive at these temperatures?
Well, you have to understand that bacteria are so small. Yeah. So they're a fraction of the diameter of a human hair.
Huh.
And so they live in a world that's completely alien to us. So when you say that they're flipping their flagella and they're moving the water, that's not true. It's been compared. If you were a microbe, if you were the size of a bacterium and you had a flagellum, moving your flagella would be like being in a swimming pool of molasses at room temperature.
Ah, so really hard.
So the so-called Reynolds number is incredibly low. And so their whole environment, and you're moving your hands through this pool of molasses at the speed of the minute hand on a clock. They move incredibly fast. If you look at it in body lengths per hour and you compared it to a bicyclist, they're moving at a speed which would be comparable to riding a bike at, I think it was 600 miles per hour.
Wow.
And they stop within one body length. So they're moving incredibly fast if you look at it at
from
scale.
that point of view, yeah. What kind of communities do they have?
So they're totally different. It's incredible diversity of organisms down there.
Right. Yeah.
And they live within communities, it's true. What we end up studying in the lab are the freaks that we can isolate.
You take them out of their community.
You take them out of their community, and then some weird organism that might be a keystone species in the sense that you provide it with some kind of growth medium, and that organism survives. And all the others are not capable of dealing with the complexity of the change that you just made.
Oh, so...
But, these organisms are amazing, there's no doubt. And I studied their biochemistry for a long time. Their DNA didn't explain how they could survive. It was long hypothesized that the DNA would be GC rich, which means two or rather of the nucleotides that are holding the DNA together that have an extra bond in them would make the DNA more stable. And that proved not to be true, that the DNA was not stabilized that way. In fact, I studied an organism near boiling sulfuric acid, and it had a very low GC content.
And that was its natural habitat?
Its natural habitat. It was first observed in the hot springs in Yellowstone by a guy named Tom Brock in the 1960s or 70s. And it's interesting because they went to look for them, and Tom Brock, who's the professor, said, well, there's nothing alive in that pool. Then his grad students found these organisms living there, which they called Sophilobus. Sophilobus acidulcodarius was the name.
And this is the ones that they tell you not to put your foot in the water there because of these bacteria in the Yellowstone water?
No, it's only because the water is so hot and so acidic that your skin would slough off.
Oh, it's not because of the bacteria.
No. They don't live at temperatures below 150 degrees. So they would never be able to be pathogenic because they can't cope with our body temperature. We're totally
alien
frozen.
territory for them.
We're too cold.
Completely too cold.
Yeah, it is interesting because they must have had a whole interesting history about how they survived the ice ages and stuff.
Well, a lot of microbes survive, a lot of high temperature microbes and a lot of medium temperature microbes and even low temperature microbes survive really well when they get cooled down, provided they get cooled down fast enough, right? So cryopreservation.
Yeah, that's
you find mammoth frozen in the glacier somewhere.
Right, with the lunch in the tummy.
Tissues that are available to use, right? It doesn't break down.
So cryopreservation works well for microbes.
It works well for microbes. Not so well for humans because of the complexity of it. We haven't figured out how to thaw us out. We can freeze us pretty well, but thawing us out is a little bit
the big story this week was that they've successfully done this with brain tissue.
Oh, okay.
The brain tissue seems to be preserved and can be thawed out after 3 months.
That makes sense. It's a lot of fatty tissue there. But it's a lot of fat in it. So fat has a way of organizing when it gets cooled. And the key has always been freezing at the right rate. If you freeze too slowly and there's water present, then the crystals grow and they damage the cell membranes.
Sure.
Disrupt
sharp edges.
If you freeze them incredibly fast, like plunge freeze them in a way that they really get exposed.
The flash freeze concept.
Flash freeze, but do it in a way that it doesn't go from the outside in, but goes through the whole thing.
All at once.
Then all at once. And then the water molecules stay as tiny little structures.
Because I understand water, when it gets colder, expands, unlike
water
a lot of substances.
expands, and it grows into crystals when it freezes.
That's what's deadly to the membrane.
That's right. But if you can freeze it fast enough that the water doesn't have time to crystallize, then the organisms can survive this kind of freezing.
Well, so you could do whole body freezes then.
Yeah, in principle.
What kind of technology freezes that way, though? Temperature from the inside out?
Well, from when you're a micron in diameter, when you're a fraction of the size of a hair, you can do this by plunge freezing organisms. And actually, usually you use what's called a cryoprotectant. That is, you soak them in something that helps to maintain them. And there are organisms that produce these funny
being dropped into a vat of liquid nitrogen or something like that.
Yeah, liquid nitrogen is not so good because it boils off. But there are organisms that have these cryoprotectants in them that are yeast and certain cells that produce these polysaccharides, these sugars. They replace the water. And there's things like tardigrades that are incredible survivors under these harsh conditions. Yeah. It's fun to talk about this stuff because it's my ancient history.
Yeah, it's a little background for you. But we
love extremophiles, and we love this kind of contemplation of the universe of microbes and the building blocks of the bigger kingdoms.
Well,
it is 228.
I like talking about that.
And the second half, we were going to go into your current project.
Yeah, we were just getting to know you.
Okay.
And letting people hear what wonderful things you've been paying attention to.
Yeah, because we do know that, in a sense, your story is a bit like a Joseph Campbell story arc where you started here, you went out into the world, learned many things, and you brought them back home. You brought them back to your here, and you're sharing them with us, your local community today.
Yeah, the journey of the hero, of course.
Yeah. What have you brought back to us? And you're going to have a project that actually transforms a bit of our ecosystem and our energy structure and our data structure.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think about my career. When I was doing marine science, I got involved in open water diving, and that provided an insight into marine science at the time that that a marine scientist, a biologist, or even a marine chemist or geologist studied the ocean with a net they dragged through the water or with a bottle they hung off a ship, and the ship's going up and down, and everything that's fragile or small and fragile in the ocean really was invisible to them because it was destroyed under the sampling conditions. And I jumped in the water and I said, "Whoa, look at that, look at that." And I was able to sample with a syringe one tiny volume of water, and then right next to it, less than an inch away, another volume of water, and I could compare them in the laboratory in ways that the other people on board couldn't. And that provided some insights. And then I was studying the effects of pressure and temperature on microbes. And some people came with samples from the so-called hydrothermal vents that we talked about. And they tried to get bacteria to grow under these super high temperature and high pressure conditions. And they did experiments in our lab with a high temperature, high pressure apparatus, and they got data and they published it in Nature. And I was in the lab and I was watching everything they were doing, and they got it published in Nature. But I watched what they did, and I knew a lot about pressure at the time. And I said, wait. They didn't do all the right experiments. And I did the control experiments that they, quote unquote, didn't have time to do. And so I discovered their results were completely wrong.
Wow.
And so their so-called black smoker bacteria, which is what the hydrothermal vents are called because of the metal sulfides that form black smoke-like stuff. And they was wrong. I published a paper saying that all of their data can be explained in another way. And I was invited to a lab in Germany where they were studying real thermophiles that grew at 220 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was exciting. I brought to them the possibility of sampling the ocean And we went around to a lot of hot springs and sampled places
what fun
in
job.
Sicily. It was fun. Yeah, it was
so the ocean was the lab.
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, we do have to take a break for a moment. Then we'll come back and we're going to talk about your latest project.
Oh, great. I'm looking forward to that.
All right.
See you in a minute.
We're with Jonathan Trent here on Santa Cruz Voice. Future Now. We'll be right back.
What's your family eating for dinner? Chef Ben here at the Back 9 Grill and Bar, where you can pick up family dinner that feeds 4 to 6 hungry people. Family meals include a full rack of ribs, a whole smoked chicken, pound of pulled pork, and plenty of barbecue sauce. Served with a full quart of baked beans, coleslaw, macaroni and cheese, dinner rolls, pickles, a side of onions, and for dessert, brownies with a pint of Mary Ann's vanilla ice cream. Call and order your family's dinner about 15 minutes before you want to eat. See you at the 9.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at Can't Say No rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Hey, Warren, you know it's been a while since I've been up to your showroom and garden center in Scotts Valley. Maybe the folks out there might want to know where you are.
Absolutely. To find Knox Roofing and the Knox Garden Box Company, just head up into beautiful Scotts Valley. We're at 46 El Pueblo Road, next door to Scarborough Lumber and the beautiful nursery. And when it comes to wood items, we have It's All About Wood gift shop. And, of course, the Knox Garden Box. Lots to look at. We'd love to see you at Knox Roofing and the Knox Garden Box store. Okay, thanks, folks.
Cannabis is one of nature's most beneficial plants. Hello, I'm Jenna. Treehouse Dispensary, we use information about cannabis to build community. Listen to Carly.
Thanks, Jenna. For those who wake up in the middle of the night, Treehouse suggests a THC CBN chocolate edible blend like Sleepy Time from Sensi Chew. Sleep the night away.
For answers to your cannabis questions, ask your friends at Treehouse Dispensary, 3651 Soquel Drive in Soquel, or ourtreehouse.io.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
We're talking with Dr. Jonathan Trent, who has been talking about extremophiles and his background here from UC Santa Cruz moving forward and studying the most extreme forms of life on the planet.
But that was just for the fun of it. We really wanted to talk about today is based on that depth of awareness and insight, but it's a whole new kind of invention that is going to benefit people here in Santa Cruz and a lot of other folks in the future.
I was studying these extremophiles, and I was studying a particular protein that they make called a heat shock protein. And that protein was incredibly interesting because when I characterized the protein, it turned out to be related to a human protein. And this gave me a cover on Nature and kind of fame and blah, blah, blah. And I went on to study it a lot more. It became a very controversial topic. And it forced me, because of the scientific community being peer review, I kind of became a pariah in the scientific community because what I observed with this extremophile didn't fit with the central dogma or the central paradigm of the scientific community at the time.
Well, original thinking is almost punished in these circles, right?
It really is. I think Schopenhauer said it best, is that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And third, it is taken as self-evident. And so until my theory becomes self-evident, I had to find another thing to do. And so because I couldn't get grants that were peer-reviewed because people were out to get me for my weirdness and my theories based on the extremophile. And one of the things I started doing, I called the Green Team at NASA, which was global research into energy and the environment at NASA. And it was basically saying, well, look, NASA's come up with a lot of great technology. What can we really apply to the global problems that are so pressing and so imminent in terms of the disasters that we keep hearing about that are really global in scale?
Well, isn't NASA naturally thinking of outer space rather than Earth space?
Always, but the original mandate, the original charter for NASA was to study space for the benefit of the Earth. And so I went back to the charter from 1950 and said, hey, everyone, what we're going to do with the green team is look at how we can utilize space technology to do things really good for the Earth.
Like satellite information.
Satellite information is a great example. The whole digitization, and ironically, that's what I'm working on now. The detour I made was I tried to work on biofuels for a while, harking back to my marine days, and started a project to look at whether we could grow algae, microalgae, marine microalgae, which are responsible for 80 to 90% of all the oil that we currently harvest from the deep earth.
Really? So oil comes from algae?
Comes from algae. Most of it, 90% of it, 80 to 90%.
So that's the biomass, that creates the oil.
They're not only the biomass, they actually produce the oil. So algae, they store starches the way a normal plant would do, but when they're going for a long-term storage, they store oils. Higher energy density, a little more difficult metabolically to make, but a lot bigger bang for the buck.
Wow.
So these algae, which were incredibly abundant, got buried during the course of time. And they're the ones that ooze their oil out into the sediments that we harvest now for the most part. Right? So I thought, well, maybe we could grow microalgae in a way that wouldn't compete with farming, wouldn't compete with agriculture to make biofuels. And the idea I came up with, which I called the Omega Project, was offshore membrane enclosures for growing algae. So here's the plan.
Algae farms?
We do algae farms offshore, freshwater algae growing on our freshwater wastewater from our community that we currently dump into the ocean and don't utilize the nutrients, causing algae blooms locally. And we capture that wastewater, it's freshwater, and we grow freshwater oil-producing algae in floating bioreactors. If they escape into the ocean, they die because they can't cope with a marine environment.
They don't like salt.
Yeah.
They're freshwater creatures.
I did a TED Talk about this. So a lot of people watched my TED Talk about it. And I raised $10.8 million to do a feasibility study.
Was that the woman at NASA? The scientist that helped approve your budget? I think it was mentioned in your biography.
Yeah, Lori Garver.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful story. She came to visit NASA Ames when she was first appointed by Barack Obama. Yeah. And I was presenting to her this idea. And she said, this is a wonderful idea. What do you need to do it? And I said, well, I need $10 million. And she said, how do you know that? And I said, well, I just wrote a DOE grant proposal that was turned down. And she said, I'll see what I can do. And a few weeks later, I had $10 million from NASA headquarters.
Wow.
And so have you been implementing it?
Yeah. So I did that project, and I kind of proved that it's really going to be difficult to compete with the oil industry, given its maturity and how relatively easy it is to harvest these bodies of oil that are under the earth.
Yeah.
But it really kept me working more and more on this project towards sustainability. What can we do with NASA technology?
Well, how long does it take to make oil from algae? If you could speed up the process, it doesn't take millions of years.
No. We can actually use the algae even just as a biomass, and through a process of pyrolysis, we can make oil.
Pretty fast?
A matter of hours.
And
really?
in scale that could a village have their own?
How scale?
Could Santa Cruz have our own gas stations from algae off the ocean?
Scaling and price are the two
hard parts doing it. If we had to, we could. But there might be better forms.
If we use all of the wastewater in San Francisco and we put it in a big floating bioreactor system in the San Francisco Bay, we would need about 1,200 acres of floating algae pods or tubes to be able to produce enough oil to make fuel for about half of the trucks and cars that the city of San Francisco runs around San Francisco.
All right. So in a hybrid universe, it might be an interesting source of
some.
It's not
trivial. It's not trivial.
No,
right.
But it had to be a major need for something like that. And it's much cheaper just to use regular oil, right?
At this point. Although nobody actually calculates the real cost.
Yeah.
The real cost in terms of the environmental impact.
Oh, and in terms of the lack of sustainability and what's going to happen 1,000 years from now when we've mined everything there was on the planet to
maybe
begin
100
with.
years from
But
now.
we have a lot of options
okay.
now. I mean, I suppose, you're down at Scripps. You probably know about Craig Ventnor and his
Sure.
whole approach and being able to or engineer some of these microorganisms to eat our waste and create useful gases from the output. Like I think you're talking about biodigesters.
Yeah.
Would be a key technology.
Yeah. So, one of these, I should tell the people out there that the organisms that live in these extreme environments, some of them are bacteria. They look like bacteria. If you know what a bacterium looks like, they're tiny, tiny, tiny spheres of life. They look like that, but on a molecular level, they're really different. And they've been characterized as a separate group of organisms called archaea. And among the archaea, there's an organism called a methanogen. And a methanogen is probably some of the most primitive life forms because they don't require oxygen to grow. In fact, they're poisoned by oxygen. Yeah. They live in what's called an anaerobic condition. And the interesting thing about them is if you give them organic material without any air present, without any oxygen present, they produce a gas called methane.
Yes, I've heard of methane.
And methane is natural gas. It's the same as they're just two different words for exactly the same thing. Biogas has got methane in it. It also has some other gases in it that are
Isn't it considered detrimental to the atmosphere, methane?
Yeah, methane is terribly detrimental. It's about 83 times worse than CO2 in terms of heating up the atmosphere
these days.
on the short term. And on a longer term, it's about 25 times worse. It has a different residence time in the atmosphere.
Cow burps and farts, the cow issues come from
Yes, about 30% of the methane release.
Now you say you can make even more. Go ahead, Bob.
The thawing of the tundra is another source of methane.
Yes.
Tundra thaw.
All the bogs, the tundra, every place where you can get a situation where you can seal the atmosphere away, use up all the oxygen as the gas permeates through the soil. And then as you get deeper, you get to this black soil where the blackness is caused by the precipitation of metal sulfides and such things. And this all done by methanogenesis. And methane seeps out of those places, and you can actually light it on fire. Mm-hmm. So the deep earth, where oil is producing, is often producing methane at the same time. So you can get liquid oil, or you can get methane. Oh. And when they pop into those wells, and they drill the wells into the deep earth, you often see them flaring off, lighting the methane so it doesn't release into the atmosphere because it's such a bad greenhouse gas. Right. And so they turn it into CO2 by burning it.
See.
But we have a better idea.
How methane could be.
The reason we're here to talk about it today is this better idea.
Right. So let me cut to the chase because I don't know how much
we only
time.
have 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
About that.
Let me quickly tell you what's going on here. So let's talk about methane.
Okay. Now it's already, we're thinking bad. Methane's too much of it and it's being released everywhere. That's a problem. But you're saying that methane is actually useful.
But he just pointed out the methane's coming out of all these natural places, but it's also coming out of places like landfills where we're burying all our organic waste. And there, too, it loses its contact to the air and it becomes methane and it seeps out into the atmosphere. So Governor Brown, back in 2015, who was quite conscious about environmental issues, said, hey, wait a minute, we should stop putting all this organic waste into our landfills and making methane for the atmosphere. And that was like 2015. And by 2022, a law called Senate Bill 1383 got passed. And that law went into effect in 2024. And this means that in all cities in California, we will no longer put organic waste into our landfills. So what are we going to do?
All right, so we've forbidden it. Have we come up with an alternative strategy? What are we doing with it?
Two things you can do with it.
Okay.
One thing is you can put it into a pile of dirt and other organics and keep it aerated by turning it.
Compost it.
And it composts.
Uh-huh.
Right. So as long as the air is present, you compost it. Or you can put it into a big tank and let it go completely anaerobic, no oxygen, use up all the oxygen, and make methane. But don't let the methane out into the atmosphere you use the methane for something positive. So that could be methane is natural gas, is what we burn in our stoves, so we can burn it in a stove.
And like an internal combustion engine could run on methane.
Exactly. We have buses running on methane, natural gas buses, right? And they call them renewable natural gas buses if they get the methane from biology.
But we also have another source for power.
So the other source of power is you can turn a generator from that internal combustion engine, and still another source is called a fuel cell.
The fuel cell is something NASA was a pioneer in.
Yes.
Understanding. Back to the Apollo program.
Right. Fuel cells were invented in the 19th century. They're really old. But the idea that they are really developing now to be efficient.
So for the uninitiated, how would you quickly describe a fuel cell?
So a fuel cell does the chemistry of taking the methane at super high temperature and breaking it into hydrogen and carbon. And the carbon in the presence of oxygen turns into CO2, and the hydrogen makes water, and the system runs a charge of electricity at the same time that it's making this chemistry happen.
So it's generating electricity?
Generating electricity with no combustion and no moving parts.
Wow.
So how come we're not using them more these days?
Yeah, because for a while they weren't very cost effective. But the technology has really, really improved a lot, and they can be used now very effectively. And they have some difficulties. You can't throttle them up and throttle them back very easily, right? So we use energy very episodically, and you can't do that very well with a fuel cell. So the fuel cell energy should be stored in a battery.
So a battery fuel cell combo would
perfect.
make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, or use a place which requires a lot of energy and make electricity
where
for
we
that
just need
place
power, constant
that needs a constant power.
Like our data centers?
Like a data center.
Or
ding, ding, ding.
A data center. Wait, I just want to add to the list also a future, like when we go for all the electric cars and,
charging
the
centers?
way that, charging centers so that batteries can just be sitting in charging centers and people can drive in and swap out the batteries
Fuel
and
cell
drive
chargers.
off.
Absolutely.
Fuel cell charging systems.
Yeah.
Right.
All right,
So-
but let's talk about your data centers.
So
data centers, first of all, for the uninitiated, data centers is really what's going on with the cloud right now and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, when people talk about the fact that Bitcoin is using cities'
crypto,
worth of electricity, we're talking about data
of power,
centers
lots of
running
power.
computers,
So
basically.
our thirst for power is increasing practically exponentially.
Yeah, it's amazing. And by the way, it doesn't stop where you just mentioned. All those things are in the news, but it's your cell phone goes through a data center. And all those pictures you put on the cloud are stored in a data center.
Right.
And when you go to the bank and you use a credit card, you're using a data center. And when you look at Netflix, you're looking at data center.
And this podcast is using a
data center.
Yes, and it's, and it's replacing normal radio and TV.
We want more.
And there are data centers doing virtually every part of our digital society.
So if you go into a data center, it is kind of an alien environment for humans, right?
Oh, my God. Yes.
It's just walls and walls of CPUs or...
They're racks.
Racks.
They're called racks. And each of them has a server or 20 servers piled up in a rack that's 24 inches by 47 inches by 67 inches tall.
Wow.
And they're filled with hundreds, or not thousands, of these racks. And they use a lot of electricity.
I
bet. They produce a lot of heat.
Yeah, you have to vent the heat out.
Well, either vent it or capture it.
Oh, yes. Instead of throwing it away, let's use it for something.
Yeah.
Use it for something.
Great.
So what can we use it for? And that was the question. Well, it turns out...
Well, heat is a big part of many biological processes.
Including that anaerobic digester that we just talked about for turning organic material into electricity. That happens at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Ooh,
and the temperature coming out of the data center, usually cooled by water, is water at about 100 to 120 degrees.
Oh.
So it's not hot enough to really heat your house because you can't put it through a pipe very easily. But if you had your data center built near your digester, then the data center heat can go to heat that digester.
Okay, so I'm imagining a building full of servers that's got a giant compost ring around it that's getting fed the heat from the building in the middle.
Well,
it's
it doesn't have to be bad enough.
Vented, yeah.
It's a good idea. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a donut ring. It could just be a little tank alongside.
Somewhere nearby.
And the data center doesn't have to be a huge football-sized 200, 300 megawatt scale. It could be 1 megawatt, and it can be in a shipping container.
All right.
So they build modular data centers.
Is that a neighborhood, a megawatt? How many people can use a megawatt? About 25 households, something like that? 40?
Maybe less.
So
yeah, that could be a pretty big.
Yeah, it could be. And I'm just thinking of following the curve here. You go into a digester, all this heat. Now, what's in the digester that's being heated? Is it the microbes that are...
We're putting our food waste.
Yeah, so you're putting in all the...
Okay, so waste management picks up the green bucket, and those trucks dump all that green bucket waste into a pile somewhere.
Or at home.
Or into a container, into a shipping container?
No, they're putting it into a big tank. It'll be a concrete tank.
Your organic waste of various sorts. So like grass clippings.
Calling it a digester?
It can be fats. It can be stuff from restaurants. It can be leftover food from
Could it be cellulose,
markets.
like cut grass from the...
Can be to some degree, not just that. Cows eat grass and they make loads of methane.
Then
so
you have different microbes for different.
You could use like the apple pulp from Martinelli's.
Biological, basically.
Anything biological could be broken down.
Okay, and do you have specific combinations of microbes to deal with different?
Then they come up pretty spontaneously. Well, if you add a little cow dung or cow manure,
there are any extremophiles?
There you go. And it's 100 degrees, so it's not really an extreme environment in my world.
Yeah. So you don't need extremophiles to make this.
There are extremophiles, by the way, and you can make the digester function all the way up to about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So there are so-called thermophilic, temperature-loving anaerobic, low oxygen methanogens that generate methane. But we don't need to go there. We can do it at a lower temperature.
Okay. All right. So then we digest this bio waste, and then we harvest the methane, and then what happens?
Methane and you said potable water comes out?
Well, wait. We have to cool the data center.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we're harvesting the heat from the data center by cooling it with water. And the water goes into the data center in what's called a heat exchanger, and the heat from the data center is dumped into the water, and the water comes out of the data center pretty hot.
And that's what goes into the biodigester.
And that's what goes into our digester in the temperature control loop that heats up the digester.
Yeah.
And the digester exports
the methane,
and
we use it in a fuel cell to make electricity for... the data center.
Yeah, back to the data center.
It's
but
a
it still needs more input from the outside as well.
Totally sustainable.
We can make a megawatt of energy for our data center with 100 tons of organic material a day, and that's about what we produce in Santa Cruz.
Yeah, so it can power itself?
Yep.
All right.
And have access to share with the community?
It would have plenty of excess depending on where we built it. Yep. It depends on how much stuff we put into it. And by the way, what we're doing right now in the city of Santa Cruz is we're exporting our organic waste. We're grinding it up and we're putting it in tanker trucks and we're driving it up to Oakland to go into a digester.
They have one already there.
So they're a little ahead of us, huh? All we need to do is attach a
most wastewater
data center.
Most wastewater treatment plants have got digesters, and they put human solid waste, so-called biosolids, into these digesters and turn it into methane. And they use the methane in generators to generate all the power they need for their water treatment plants.
So using the generators with the methane, and you're suggesting that the fuel cells are more efficient use of the energy than generators.
And the other good thing about what I just told you, unlike using the human waste, is that when we take the food waste into the equation, what comes out of the digester when you muck it out is perfect fertilizer. If you use human waste, then you run into the difficulty that human waste can't go on food crops officially.
Right, because it needs to be sanitized.
It can go on food crops if it's been heated and pasteurized.
But we have plenty of other waste to work with.
But it has to go a higher temperature.
It has to go to cotton or some other non-food
it's more of an issue.
But here we have a food waste which can be organic fertilizer and be used extensively. So we get methane and we get compost out of our food waste. At the same time, we get electricity, and we have a data center that's
and we have salty water going into the ocean that isn't polluting the ocean.
Oh, well, that's another part of the story.
Yeah. Like, where would you locate this?
So I'm thinking UC Santa Cruz, possibly. or Watsonville Wastewater Treatment Plant, just near the Pajaro River. Yeah, and it's an ideal location in many ways because they already are exporting water to the farmlands near there. And the story about the saltwater is interesting, but we probably don't have time to go into it. But it's an interesting side story about
part of
the
our
seawater
community.
intrusion.
That's a big issue here.
Oh, the seawater intrusion. Yeah, our underground water is getting polluted by ocean water, right?
Yeah, forming brackish water, a mixture of fresh water and seawater. And so what we initially proposed is that we would use this brackish water to cool the data center. And the reason for that is the warm water coming out of the data center saves a lot of energy in purification. So if you purify brackish water that's hot, it uses half the energy of purifying that same water when it's cold.
Oh, so we can distill water and have potable water out of that? And then
you do reverse osmosis. You don't distill it.
Oh, okay. Filter it.
You could distill it, a vacuum distillation.
Oh, cool. Wow. Well, how many legs do you have for this project? It sounds so wonderful.
Well, I've talked to the Chancellor's office and to the engineering department at UC Santa Cruz, and we're in the process of thinking about whether we could do something at UCSC.
It's very early stages.
As a demonstration project. And in the city of Watsonville, I've been talking to the people in the public utilities office, and they need to upgrade their wastewater plant. And this may be a good way to upgrade it because we can get some money for innovative, new, and really biological.
Fantastic.
We need about $10
All right,
million.
Jonathan Trent,
Awesome.
everybody. Where can people find out more or keep track of you, Jonathan? This is wonderful.
Well, we haven't put a website up yet because we don't want to fill the data centers with more dark data. But we're in the process of making a website so that once this project gets traction and we see a clear way forward, then we'll have a website for everybody to go see, and you guys can post it on your web.
And the project name?
The project's called UpCycle Systems.
UpCycle Systems. So we do a Google search on UpCycle Systems and find something?
Well, now you won't. Now you'll find
Soon,
a company called UpCycle Technology. But UpCycle Systems shows up in my interview that I did with NASA. So if you Google my name and NASA
Jonathan
interview.
Trent. A NASA interview. Jonathan Trent. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Alan. Thank you, son.
Have a great future now,
Thank you.
everybody. All right, we got to get out of here for the next show. Love you guys. This is fantastic.